Good afternoon, and welcome to today's Adweek webinar, Content Overload, Amplify Your Brand's Voice in an Oversaturated Market, sponsored by Similarweb. I'm Danielle Moore, Senior Manager of Webinars here at Adweek's Content Studio, and I'll be your host today. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to make sure everyone knows what to expect from today's webinar and is familiar with the features of our platform. The actual presentation should go somewhere in the 30-minute range, and then after that, we will have time for audience Q&A. So if at any point you have a question for our speakers, just use the Q&A tool beneath the video window on your screen, and we'll get to as many questions as we can after the end of the presentation. Also, it's not too late to invite your colleagues to join us at today's webinar. About 15 minutes ago, you received a final reminder email from us. In there, you'll find a link to the webinar registration page that you can share with your colleagues. There's still plenty of time for them to join us live, but if they can't, today's webinar is being recorded and they can always catch the on-demand version. In fact, the on-demand recording is available to all registrants. We'll be sending a link later today when it's live around 3:30 Eastern. And if you'd like a PDF of today's slide deck, you'll find it in the event resources area. As always, if you enjoy today's webinar, definitely check out the full Adweek webinars calendar at adweek.com/webinars. You'll see what we have coming up and also get access to our archive of on-demand webinars. Now, let me introduce you to today's speakers. We're happy to be joined by Theo Suarez, VP of Strategy at Elephant. Theo started out in creative strategy at agencies including Chiat Day, Gray, and 180 LA before moving into the new digital product space at Huge. He is now the head of strategy for Elephant, a creative company with presence in LA, San Francisco, and New York. Einav Yakobovich, I got it, Global Creative Director, Uber. Einav currently focuses on Uber Eats and social impact across EMEA and APAC. Her work has been recognized by Cannes, D&AD, One Show, Clios, LIA, Effie, and the Webby Awards, and she was named a top 30 agency creative by Adweek. Amelia Lee, publisher and media industry lead at Similarweb, previously a media strategist at Condé Nast and a media buyer for LVMH, Amelia helps brands develop strategies to engage new audiences, grow ad sales, and maximize consumer conversions. We've got some great content to dive into today, so let me bring our speakers up on screen to get us started.
Thanks, Danielle. So for those who aren't familiar, Similarweb is a digital intelligence platform. It allows brands, agencies, and media companies to access insights about any industry or even any website. Our clients use us to understand how people are engaging with a brand or a brand's competitors, where the audience is spending its time, what topics the audience finds relevant. Our clients then use us to attract and win new business. They use us to develop the correct message and make sure that that message lands in the right place. And after a campaign has completed, they use us to prove ROI. We cover nearly every website in nearly every country, and we do this all without the use of cookies. So our data comes from 4 anonymized sources. It's then cleaned, aggregated, and modeled. In the end, it's validated against a first-party direct measurement training set. So at Similarweb, we watch our data set grow by the minute. The web is an eternally expanding space. We're here with Theo and Einav to discuss exactly how to navigate this ever competitive landscape. So Theo, Einav is a digital experience agency, which makes your work both highly relevant in today's world, but also, I'm sure, very daunting. So what challenges are you facing today?
Yeah, thanks, Amelia. I think there's a combination of challenges that are all happening at the same time and feeding each other that makes it really hard for brands and experiences to stand out. I think the first is that there's really a shift in user behavior away from big public shared narrative social media channels and into more closed groups. People like to congregate amongst friends and family and people that they share interests with in smaller communities. And what that really does is it creates all these microcultures, and the trends move really fast and they're really personal to these different communities. And you see that as well with like the algorithms that we use in all of our digital channels. It narrows us into our interests, and it makes us connect with friends and people that we share those interests with more and more, which is great. But also it makes it very hard for brands to reach people if they're trying to break into these new interest groups, or if they're trying to connect with people that have very specific things that they follow and basically don't follow or pay attention to anything else. So, it's a really challenging media environment and digital environment for brands to connect with people. And at the same time, there's been this explosion of brands of all kinds, right? So it really started with this DTC kind of revolution in digital brands, going around retail channels and around the established players and going straight to audiences. But now there's, dozens of similar brands in basically every category that are all trying to use these same methods to reach people in these niche communities. So it's very competitive. There's a lot of brands saying similar things. There's a lot of people living in these small groups that basically can filter out things that they're not interested in. And people are very savvy to marketing and brands today. So, as a agency, building experiences and trying to help brands break through, it's really challenging and forces us to really think creatively about where are those moments where we can really get in front of people and say and do something that they might pay attention to.
And I will add, Theo, I think everything you said is exactly right. I think one key challenge, as you said, is that a lot of the brands that are similar are saying a lot of the same things, which is, of course, working for Uber and Uber Eats. We're seeing a lot of our competitors, we have the same challenges. And so we live in similar worlds, and we constantly have to think, how can we talk about something different that is still relevant to us, and how can we change in a way outside of our category to really own a bigger space of what is important to people and not just talking about the category. So I think that's really a big thing that we're seeing. And then I think also in general, people are skeptical of ads. This has been true for a long time. I think especially with COVID and all of us being home and it being kind of difficult, we don't really want a product to tell us to be happy or to go get it or whatever it is. So I think, I think that's great. Interesting.
So in between the skepticism and all of the brands working with the same message, can you tell us where you have found success? How have you managed to break through this clutter?
I think there's a few ways. Specifically with work that I've done with Uber, I think two ways that I can think off the top of my head that have been really successful have been, one, aligning with culture and thinking how can we be relevant with what's happening and what people are talking about, and two, really giving a value add. And two examples I can speak to is for Uber Eats, our Australia market, working with a wonderful agency, Special Group, and our Australia team, we worked on with Australia Open, which has 13 million viewers. This has been now a 4-year partnership, but in the first year, what we did was actually hijack the live sport broadcast. So what happened was people were tuning into the game. They thought they were watching the game live, but then the players themselves, having worked with Nadal, Serena Williams, Ash Barty, amongst others, turned to camera in the middle of the game and order an Uber Eats. And so this kind of led to people constantly waiting during the game for an Uber Eats ad to happen. And this was really successful. And we've continued working with Special Group now for 4 years, and we continue to make it really exciting. And we've seen people who are genuinely excited to see this content. And I would say another example, having worked with our wonderful French team on Buzzman, is Whopper Quarantine, which was during COVID. We've seen a lot of restaurants had to close. Burger King had to close for a bit as well. And Buzzman had this wonderful idea. It was a partnership between us, Burger King, and Carrefour, which is one of the biggest supermarkets in France. And when you could no longer order a Whopper, we did the Whopper Quarantine, where you could instantly in the Uber Eats app click a button through Carrefour to order all the ingredients packaged together and make the Whopper at home. And again, I think that was a wonderful example because it went beyond traditional advertising. It was a value add, and people really saw how the brand talks to this, what they're going through and really helps them with that, as opposed to just advertising a message, giving an action. So I think those are really wonderful examples I've seen us do within Uber. And pre-Uber, having worked for NGOs with Doctors of the World, which was quite interesting because we had no budgets, we had zero budgets. It really came into, which maybe you could talk later about this as well, but hijacking specific moments, whether with Google AdWords, and just thinking what's a moment that people are talking about something and how can we join the conversation. So I can, an example with that, one of the first campaigns with Doctors of the World many years ago was when the Ebola crisis broke out. That most popular costume that year in the United States was the Ebola costume. So people were spending like $80 for a costume when doctors actually needed real protective Ebola suits to help people. And so we had this campaign. It was 7 days to Halloween. So we had 7 days to create this, where we told people it's okay, go ahead and wear that costume, but then buy a real one too. And so through Twitter, anyone who was wearing that costume, we messaged them to buy a real suit. This got picked up on CNN, on BBC, on NBC, and we actually saw a lot of people reacting positively. So I think, it all has to do with aligning with culture, adding value, and hijacking specific moments, I think, are ways that I've seen done really well.
So I want to back up, or I guess flash forward to Uber for a moment. These ideas, you're the client now, you came from an agency. What is the brief? How do you present this and come up with these ideas?
Oh, it changes so much with every market and with every agency we work with. I think I am learning. It's quite interesting being client side now and being the one writing the briefs. And I think, a lot of the success lies in writing a successful brief, which I think really comes with starting with a question as opposed to an answer, and really working very closely with our agency. And I think for the Whopper quarantine example as well, Buzzman came to us and said, this is a problem. How can we solve it? So I think sometimes it's even a communication that comes both ways. And I think that's a good way to answer it. In the UK, for example, we work with Mother, who's a wonderful agency. And what's been wonderful with them after working together for a few years is now we actually work on the brief together sometimes. So as opposed to us as a client coming to them and saying, this is exactly what we need, this is how we need you to answer it. At this point, they know us, they know our problems, they've helped us be more successful. And so we can sit in a room together and say, okay, this is our challenges now. This is what we want to achieve. How can we achieve it? And we do all these workshops together, and together we're able to write a successful brief. So I think it really comes to the partnership that we have with our agencies that has been wonderful. And keeping the briefs as open as possible.
Well, that's a great tip. Just keep it wide open and allow them to do what they're best at. So Theo, can you share some successes you've had?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the first one, building off the point about culture, working with Beats by Dre, we've worked with them for over 4 years, and a brand that lives in culture. It was built through culture, right? Seeing the product on interesting people, but obviously COVID put a stop to most of that, and it was really interesting marketing challenge as well. To your point, like, not exactly a brief per se, but a challenge that the brand had in this moment, and kind of working together to come up with a solution. And at the same time, what we were seeing with Beats was, for people more like millennial generation, they grew up, the brand was really authentic and fresh when it came out. But now for younger people, the brand's been around 15 years. It doesn't have that same kind of cachet, right? So, which is kind of crazy to think. I feel like we were there when Beats came out, and now it's like a really normal brand.
That makes me feel old, definitely.
Yeah. But what was interesting about it was the brand has all of these cultural stories that were that were living sort of under the radar, and people would experience the brand in the world. But when that stopped happening, they needed a way to tell the story and kind of get in front of people and break through all of this clutter. So what we did with Beats was really take what we called the world of Beats, which were all of these interesting partnerships and events and record releases and athlete sponsorships and things they were doing, and we basically made a digital magazine for the brand, relaunching all their digital platforms and bringing all this content to life in this really interesting design and editorial system that was really shareable. And it was like bite-sized stories all the time, with social posts and video and all these interesting things. And it just translated what the brand was already doing in a much more cultural, authentic, natural, social kind of way. So, I think, similar to what you were saying, it's like telling the story in a culturally interesting way, really made a big difference, with that brand, keeping it top of mind through COVID, but also now creating this kind of editorial ecosystem where all the things the brand was already doing is now showing up in an interesting way. And the other example, is playing into a community, which I think is another thing that, if a brand has the opportunity to do that, they have an authentic community or an interest that there is a community around, can be really powerful. So another example that we worked on a few years ago was with Twitch, which of course is a culture and is a community, right? That's what the whole product is and what the brand is. But Twitch was launching a new brand, like a new design and a new kind of set of brand tools. And they really asked us to understand how to launch it, how to get people to care about a new brand. It's something that obviously the press will care about, people in our industry will care about, but what about these thousands and thousands of creators and hosts and fans that use this platform? How do we get them engaged with this? And so we did a number of things, and we did paid media and social campaigns and some other things. But one of the most impactful things was actually building a site on the About Twitch page that was a series of games and interactive experiences that took the brand's new design and the new brand elements and made them interactive. And that was really driven by insight around how the creators like to use building blocks and then create something of their own, whether that's their own game, their own visuals, their own music, their own tools and things that they use for their streams to kind of brand themselves as well, because Twitch is really a platform for people to create their own communities. And we created a digital keyboard because the font was called Moog, right, which was like the original synthesizer. And we made some just really fun experiences like that really tapped into the community and empowered the community and gave them something participatory, not just marketing. And those experiences were really, really popular. Like, people were sharing them. They got a lot of press. The community was kind of calling out how cool these experiences were. So again, without necessarily having to buy people's attention, we took it, built something off the insights into the community, made it participatory and interactive. And that community then took it and did exactly what we hoped, and which was create something out of those assets. So, not every brand has a community. Not every brand has that great opportunity to do that. But, when you do have those opportunities, it can be really, really powerful to break through. When people that you follow or friends or peers start interacting with something and sort of sharing it organically, versus relying on media necessarily.
I love that example because I think we talk about UGC as part of the clutter a lot of the time. Like, everyone creating their own things on every social channel is one of the things that brands are really struggling with. So to be able to just lean into that and make that successful, love that example. That's fantastic. So I want to talk about tips. At Similarweb, we encourage our clients to use the platform to think beyond click-through rate. So having a timely understanding of what people are searching for, where they're going with that search, how they're engaging with topics, how the metrics trend over time. These are some of the tips that we provide our clients when they start thinking about how to approach their message and how to measure its success. So to our panelists, we have an agency perspective and a client perspective. What tips can you share with us today? So Theo, let's start with you.
Yeah. So when we talk to clients about brand strategy, I think going back to the earlier point about how quickly trends move and how, different audiences have their own worlds of trends and things that are interesting to them. What we really try to do is dig really deeply into a brand's DNA and find strategies, positionings, messaging that feels really relevant to today, but isn't trendy, if that makes sense, because it's really hard to stay on top of things. And if you try to tap into a trend, it just moves on. So from a brand strategy point of view, we really try to think about things that are both obviously super relevant, but that can last, and that can be a brand creating its own world and its own story that can, of course, evolve over time, but be really ownable and not reliant on trends. The other thing in terms of like media and channels and experiences is one thing that we've found to be really a powerful way to think about brands and brand building is not the idea of a channel strategy, but the idea of an ecosystem. Actually, the majority of interactions brands and people have with brands is not media, right? It's not marketing. It's searching on Google and landing on a website. It's reading reviews on third-party sites. It's asking a friend and getting a link to something. It's seeing an article. And so what we really try to do is look at every touch point that a brand has with its audience, whether those are owned, like of course websites, social media and stuff, but also things that they don't own, like where are they being talked about on Reddit? What are the reviews like on Amazon? What are the reviews like in the App Store? And when you map that whole ecosystem, you get a really clear perspective on how do real people engage with this brand, not how do we build a funnel that nobody ever goes through in order, but what are the real journeys that people take to engage with the brand? And then what are the opportunities to make things? And I think one of the big things that's inspiring for me, coming from advertising agencies and now working in digital experiences, understanding that a lot of time the reason people fall off with brands might be something like they can't find the product in their size or something, or like something like that. That's more of an experience with the brand versus necessarily a perception or a message. And so a lot of the work that we do and we talk to clients about is where really are the biggest barriers and where are the biggest opportunities to make journeys that people have with your brand like really magical and really seamless and really memorable. And then designing creative briefs and ideas against those touch points along the journey, of course, laddering up to a campaign or a brand strategy, but not forgetting about all those little moments that can make or break somebody's experience with a brand.
Theo, I want to back up to something that you said at the beginning. You don't want to jump on trends because there's no longevity there. How do you differentiate between a trend and an important moment that you do need to be a part of?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think there's macro trends, right? Like people are going towards natural products. Macro trend, 100%, brands should be listening to that and something real people care about. There are big cultural moments, award shows, things happening in the news that, are important to be a part of, especially if it aligns with either a product or part of your brand DNA. I think when I think about trends to maybe be wary of, it's like, things you see where it's like, everybody's talking about this little thing on TikTok right now. Like that could be interesting for sure, but probably by tomorrow, no one will remember that. So I think it's finding what's right for the brand. Again, going back to the longevity of your strategy, it's understanding what the right opportunities are and where you can actually connect with communities. And then which, macro or moments can you actually authentically say something or add something to the conversation that will feel like it's authentic to the brand, but also something that people might pay attention to.
So we can ignore the TikTokers when they say we need to throw out our skinny jeans. That's what I'm hearing.
Depends which
Yeah, you're saying no. Skinny jeans are done. All right. Noted. I'll clear out my closet after this. Thank you. Enough.
No, yeah, I think everything you're saying, Theo, is so true. And I think it is really about figuring out what is a moment in the user experience when they want to hear from you and where it's a seamless moment to interact. And I'm going to give another example from our French team and Buzzman, but in France, Uber Eats, we're the sponsors of Marseille, and we are the sponsors of the l'OM, the football team. And we were thinking, how do we share our messaging during a game in a way that adds value? And Buzzman had this wonderful idea that there's moments during the game, which is, I don't know if the VAR is the name in French or the name in English as well, but the VAR is when if something happened and the referee can't see it, you have to go back to the cameras and stop the game and wait while the cameras are showing whatever happened. And this is a frustrating moment where you have to wait and you're not really doing much. And so we created this campaign with Buzzman, which was ongoing for a while. #Merci la VAR, thank you to the VAR. That every time there was this waiting moment, Uber Eats would actually give a discount. So it's actually a perfect moment to order Uber Eats. And I think it was really that. It was like we knew people are already there. We knew we were messaging them. We knew they're looking at their phones while they're watching the game. And so it's really finding them in that moment. So I think, it's really thinking through that. What is the moment that we can talk to people? And Theo also talked to Google search, and back to Doctors of the World when I worked with them. We had a very successful campaign with them as well back when during the election of Trump. Right before that happened, there was the highest people ever looking to move to Canada. So that was like that search spiked up, moving to Canada. And so what we did is we just, through Google search, hijacked moving to Canada. And when people were looking for that, they would find straight away our website, which they thought was about moving to Canada. But then it actually gave the message of, imagine if your life actually depended on fleeing your country. And just back to what was happening in Syria and inviting people to donate, but in a funny way, not in a sad way. It was done quite comically. And actually, the day of the election, when the Canadian migration site crashed, a lot of people went to our site, and we just saw that I think donations went up by 190% or something. So it really was looking through the, say, user experience, which was quite interesting. Yeah.
All right, great. Thank you both for that. So I think we will turn it to Danielle for some audience questions now.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those insights, Aina, Theo, Amelia. We do have time for a few questions, and we'll get to as many questions as we can over the next 5 to 10 minutes. If we don't get to your question, we always make sure that they get forward over to our sponsor so that they have the opportunity to possibly reply offline. But first, a couple of reminders. Today's webinar has been recorded and will be available on demand later this afternoon. We'll be emailing everyone a link to the recording, so keep an eye out for that. And if you want a copy of today's slides, you can find the PDF in the event resources area on your screen. Now we can get to some questions. So we had a question come in, and I would love to pose this to you, Theo, to start, because you said something really interesting earlier that I think relates. You were talking about how a brand that lives in culture is built through culture, which as someone who comes from entertainment marketing, I love so much, and it resonated with me. Part of what you were saying was it was tough to build those cultural moments when nobody was able to be out and about doing things, right? So the question is, now that COVID restrictions are lifting in many parts of the world, how does this change consumer behavior, and does it make your job easier or harder?
So there's been some really interesting writing about retail behavior and how that's shifted through COVID and now shifting again. And what's interesting is, I think the first year to 2 years, it forced everyone to do everything digitally, right? It was like, I need to buy food online. I need to buy everything online. And so a lot of businesses had to like rush to transform digitally to serve people. And a lot of people who weren't necessarily interested in shopping for things online necessarily had to do it out of necessity. And there was a lot of prognostication of like, the digital future has come 10 years sooner because of COVID. But actually over the last like 6 months to a year, there's actually been a return to retail shopping that's like almost as high, if not higher than before. And so I think things that you can do online that are really easy, like I don't need to go wait in line at a bank branch because I can use my phone, will persist. But, you know, I think there's an inherent desire to get out again. And I think it's really hard for digital experiences, especially like e-com, which is built around how do I just check out as quickly as possible? That's not fun if I'm shopping for sneakers or if I'm looking at furniture, things like that. And so there's actually been a big shift back towards in-person shopping. And I think that part of this opening up of the world again gives brands opportunities to create experiences that bring people together, that make the brand, you know, tangible in an experiential way, to bring strategies to life in a cultural way in cities and things like that. So I think, you know, the expectation of best in class and interesting digital experience is going to stay. But I think now that people can go out, they're going to want to do that again. And actually to the point of, you know, saying something and doing something interesting and different, I think there's a huge opportunity to actually make brands tangible again in a way that can be digitally connected and all that stuff, but is a big opportunity as people get out of the house again.
Totally agree. Yeah, the pent-up demand for experience and the hunger for something different and more tangible, as you were saying, definitely creates a lot of opportunities for some really fun, engaging, you know, ops for brands to shine. So great to hear your thoughts on that. Our next question, and I'd love for Einav for you to take this since we were talking about some things earlier on the pre-call. Outside of brands you have worked on, who do you think has done the best job breaking through to their audience recently?
Yeah, I think two that come to mind, and I'll let Theo add to them later because I know we both agreed on these, are Oatly and Airbnb. I think outside of specific examples, they're two brands that you instantly know what they stand for, and they've done it very well. I think Oatly is a phenomenal example because if you Google, and many of you know, like Oatly original design, you'll see how different they used to look. And just how, I mean, just starting with really design thinking, they've turned themselves from what used to look like a very healthy but unexciting brand to just something very cool. And I think they're able to say what they stand for in such a punchy and direct way. So they're very funny, but I instantly know what they're about, and I want to be part of that movement. I love oat milk now, but I'm not one of those people that felt like I need to steer away from regular milk. But they make it cool to join this movement, and they do it in a very fun way. So I think they're wonderful. And Airbnb, I think, you know, I can speak to us on the clients, and I'm sure it's the same for many clients. It's a brand that constantly comes up because they're so clear about what they stand for, belong anywhere, and it's just constantly, it's just constant. And I do love also how, also personally loving and focusing on social impact, how they're able to embed that very well into their business. Because with Belong Anywhere, there's Airbnb.org, which is, anyone who doesn't know, it's the same as Airbnb.com, but you can rent your room or house for a day or a year for free to someone who needs it. And I am based in the Netherlands. We've had many in the south where I am, Ukrainian families come recently, and I'm hearing from many friends of mine using Airbnb.org. So you really see how this really translates both into their company mission, but their social impact mission. So I think they're both really wonderful examples. I don't know, Theo, if you have anything to add to them.
Yeah, I'll add to Oatly. You know, I think they had that really famous billboard or whatever it was they got sued for that said it's like milk but for humans, which I think is just so brilliantly provocative, but in like a not provocative way. But it got people talking. They got sued for it, which was like probably exactly what they wanted. And I see the billboards for them actually a lot around my neighborhood. And the campaign right now is is rarely asked questions about Oatly. And it's really funny, silly questions like, will my refrigerator keep Oatly cold if I don't have solar panels? And it's just like things that are like stupid questions, but poke fun at the kind of climate conversation in a way that is just really charming. So yeah, they're a fun brand. For Airbnb, I think something that stood out for me lately was the Bluey House, mostly because it's my daughter's favorite show. But again, it's like they recognized this trend and this like micro community and interest of all over the world, like parents and kids who love Bluey. And they did something that I wish we could have actually done it, but it was just an experience that people could go do it. They made it real. They added something cool that you could have never imagined to the conversation about Bluey. And it was just another really charming example. And then I'll add one brand just because I mention this brand in as many meetings as possible, but Liquid Death, the water brand, is just hilarious right now. I think they've designed a brand to be provocative, and they do really interesting marketing, whether it was painting a skateboard with Tony Hawk's blood or sending a witch to the Super Bowl and trying to bet against, it's like they just do really fun things that are inherently shareable. And because the brand was designed in such a way that that's the ethos of it, it feels really natural and like you want to hear what comes from them next. So it's definitely doable to break through, and a lot of brands are doing cool stuff.
Fabulous examples. Creatives out there, if you haven't seen those projects, take note, look them up. I know I will be looking at some of those after the fact because they sound really cool. Our next question, which I think is relatable for probably so many people in our audience today. I know I relate to this personally and would love to hear your thoughts on it. What do you personally do to avoid feeling overwhelmed by the amount of content available to you, not just as practitioners, but as people? And I'll throw that one to you to start.
I would definitely say disconnect. I used to live in New York for 13 years, and now I live in Maastricht, which is a small city in the south of the Netherlands. And in front of my house, I just have a field with horses, and I just go on a walk without my phone. So yeah, I think to what Theo said before, in like nowadays, but for brands, it's just building a long-term strategy of what you stand for. And that, as you were just mentioning with Airbnb and Oatly, because when I want to disconnect, I'm not going to latch onto any specific trend as well. So I would say that's what I do.
Definitely a good strategy. I love it. I wish we could see the horses in the field outside your house now. That'd be a very good webinar shot. But that's great advice, I think. Definitely disconnecting is something that helps me as well. And I'm sure a lot of people out there feel like they need permission if they're in the content world, to not always be absorbing what's new and what's different. So I really like that advice. I think our audience will appreciate that too. Some other questions that have come in here. What are your best practices for supporting creative thinking and creative energy at brands? The question asker says, it's hard to deliver brilliant briefs that stand out when you have the same old questions, problems, solutions coming up over and over, which you guys talked a little bit about earlier. Theo, curious to get your thoughts on that to start. What are your strategies for sort of supporting that creative thinking brand side with your clients?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one thing that's been really interesting, especially here at Elephant, thinking through ecosystems and looking for opportunities. The expected brief might be we need more awareness, or we need to drive through a campaign, or we need to think at that level. But I'll give you an example of something that was really interesting for Beats that led to some really interesting creative ideas, but you might not think so from the beginning. Was one of the sort of retail shopper journey workshops that we did found that there was this moment where most people actually buy Beats through third parties, like at Target or at Best Buy or something, right? And so when you buy that product, especially online, there's a moment where the brand actually drops away. So you might be shopping online, you might be looking at reviews, but then you go to the store and you buy the product. And then maybe later you look up a tutorial on how to use it or something. But there was this moment at purchase where the brand was dropping away. And we sort of jokingly called it, how can we design a creative receipt? You know, like you go to Best Buy and you get a receipt, or you buy something online, you get an email, your purchase is complete. You can expect it in 3 days. But this is the most important moment in the whole journey. You've just bought the product and the brand wasn't saying anything,
right.
You know? And so, you know, it was really kind of funny to think like, we're going to do a whole brief about the receipt when you buy the product. But, you know, at the end of the day, that is the moment where you've made your decision, you voted with your dollars. Now you're an owner of a brand. And so that led to a lot of interesting creative ideas around how to message that, how to celebrate that, how to go from I'm selling to you to now you're part of a community, you're part of a brand, and we want to support you as an owner, and we want to get the best from your product, and you know, and make sure you have all the resources that you need, and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, I think what we've found a lot of success with is finding those moments that you might not think are that interesting, but actually could be some of the most important moments in a person's journey with your brand. And when you have these really tight things to solve, you can actually be super creative in those moments. So, you know, I think don't overlook small moments, because they can be really, really interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah. What an interesting case study of the purchase journey and a place to be creative that people probably hadn't thought about before. So that's definitely cool to hear about that. Einaf, anything to weigh in on with that question, since you're now brand side and you've experienced with creative briefing as well?
Yeah, I think you gave a great example of specific. But if I give an example of the general, we recently had a wonderful workshop with Mother, our agency in the UK. And as you were saying before, one of the challenges is a lot of similar brands are saying the same thing or in the same category. And they just had a fun workshop where it was just simple questions. I remember one right now, which is, what would you want a grandmother to say about you? But I think and the more ridiculous questions, the better, because then we just start talking and kind of talking in circles. And then this led to us going into a very different direction from where we started, and rethinking completely the brief and completely how we should talk about our brand. So I think that was a very interesting exercise. And it also led us to talking about just changing, because Theo, you were talking before about brands that are already loved and have a community. But when you're kind of in a brand that you want to change perceptions, with Uber Eats, you know, there's sometimes a perception of ordering food at home. It's kind of lazy, but it's also genius, right? Because it makes life easier, and we all love it, and we've done it a lot. And I know for me, having a baby now, it's wonderful. But how do we change that? And we have talked a lot about Netflix, and this, I don't think it's something specifically Netflix did. It might be a cultural thing. But I remember back in the day when staying home on a Saturday night and watching movies was quite pathetic, and you wouldn't admit to people that that's what you were doing. And now it's like, well, now for a number of years, Netflix and chill is like the cool thing to do. And it's very cool to see how you could change the perception of something that was quite negative into something positive.
Right.
And so I think seeing these challenges from a bigger picture and just poking very random questions is really was a fun exercise.
Absolutely, yeah. So changing your thinking a little bit, putting things on their head, maybe thinking about, audiences you haven't been speaking to directly with your brand, but who get spoken to tangentially and what they're thinking. That's, I think, all really interesting ways to think about fostering creative thinking organizationally. So thank you for sharing. Other questions on the list here that I'd love to get to. So the next one that came in is, what are some best practices of discovery questions? So this relates to what you're saying just now, to draw out those moments from consumer research or even client research. So essentially finding the ways to authentically connect as opposed to, producing content that is a bit more predictable or repetitive. So what kind of, thinking exercises, questions from that perspective of, consumer research and trying to find those special moments would either of you recommend? Theo, I'll throw it to you first.
Oh man. I mean, we in the digital product and experience space, we read a lot of reviews because hearing people say what they like or dislike, obviously in a very natural way without it being like a focus group is usually really instructive. And also looking at conversations that are unbranded. So if there's a community around an interest that maybe is relevant to your brand or product, look at what people are talking about that doesn't have anything to do with brands, and you can kind of find interesting ways to tap into different communities or topics in that sense. The other thing we do a lot with user research is just ethnographic research. We've had a lot of success with digital ethnographies where you actually program a series of questions into there's different tools that you can use, but it's sort of like an Instagram-ish tool. And it releases a question to someone each day, and they can answer it on their own time whenever is sort of natural for them. And we can say, can you go to a store and look for X? Or can you watch TV for an hour and tell us what you did? Or can you take a picture of this or that? Or write, draw a picture on a piece of paper and take a picture of it. So trying to be more natural in research and get out of the focus group and get out of that, when people can kind of answer questions because they're either in peer environments or they're in unnatural environments, and getting research into a more authentic space has yielded a lot of really interesting insights. And then on the client side, something we always do for every project, especially when we kick off, is we stakeholder interviews across an organization. And interviewing people outside of like the marketing team or the digital team generally surfaces really interesting insights. Like, what is the challenge the customer service team's having? Or what is the challenge that the tech team is having, or the finance team? Because that can also help really understand, like, what's a real business challenge? What's a real product challenge? What's a real marketing challenge that gives us different inputs versus, the expected brief or the expected ask to some of the earlier comments about going beyond those things.
And I can add one thing to that, which is I think something really interesting about working on Uber Eats across Europe, Middle East, Africa, Asia, is just how the relationship with food is so different across every country. And a lot of our campaigns were born from insights. So in Australia and New Zealand, the biggest insight was that the barrier is that people don't know what they want to get for dinner at 5 p.m. or at 8 p.m., whatever, and they're frustrated because they don't know what to order. And so the whole campaign for Special Group of Tonight I'll Be Eating was born, which has been a campaign for a number of years, which was really tackling that straight on. Meanwhile, in the US and UK, it's very common. People order all the time. But then in France, which, people would love food and love the quality, the insight was that for people, sometimes it's shameful to say that they order delivery, just like watching porn. And so that kind of led to a whole new territory with the creative. And so it's been quite interesting. Also, when you build a global brand that also has to be locally relevant, how it leads you to such different ways and to exciting briefs as well, I think.
That is so interesting. What fun insights to be going through for that. That's very, very cool to hear about. Thank you both for sharing. So the last question that I think we'll be able to get to today, and I want to pose this one to Amelia. Amelia, I'm going to put you on the spot here because I think you'll have something good to share for this. Someone asks, how do you identify the trends that align with your brand? What tools do you use, and how do you verify that the trend is a good fit between brand and audience, which of course is so crucial? Thoughts surrounding that?
Great question. And yeah, I'm happy to answer that. We work with thousands of agencies and clients, brands. So having access to Google information across the board, what are people searching for that contains your brand's name? That's easy, right? You can sort of figure that out. But taking a step back and being able to access what people are searching for when they end up on your site, when they're not searching for you. So non-organic searches. What are people searching for when they're looking for your competitors? Expanding beyond just the simple keyword, looking at the whole string gives you really good insight into what is happening in the space. From there, we encourage our clients to follow the journey. Where are they landing? How much audience overlap do you have with different sites? Just really getting to know what's going on in the space beyond where you would normally think totally pivots the conversation and allows you to understand the space in a completely different way. So very much like what Theo was saying before, just thinking beyond, really coming up with new opportunities, a new understanding of what's happening. And tactically, it's really just looking at the keywords, looking where people are going, having access to all of that information, how people are engaging with it. You know, if they go to a site and bounce off quickly, is that helpful to you? Probably not. So those are all of the things that we arm our clients with and hold their hands as they're figuring out.
Got it. Yeah, thanks for sharing those insights. Definitely that kind of data can be a super powerful tool, I'm sure, for a lot of different brands in different spaces. So unfortunately, that is all the time we have for questions. I'd like to thank our speakers as well as our sponsor, Similarweb. Some final reminders: make sure you download the slides from the event resources area and check your email for a link to the on-demand recording later today. And if you enjoyed today's webinar, please check out the Adweek webinar calendar at adweek.com/webinars. Again, big thank you to Theo, Anab, and Amelia. And we thank you to our audience for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing everyone at an upcoming Adweek webinar. Thanks.